Victor Kane slammed his fist on the table and pointed a shaking finger at Hannah's face. You think hiding inside some rich man's house saves you? I will drag you out in front of every important person in the city and make sure that the whole world knows exactly who you are, a broke, worthless nobody who can't even pay her dead mother's bills. Hannah looked him dead in the eyes and said quietly, "Then come find me." She turned and walked away. She had no idea how dangerous those 4 words would become. If this story already has your heart beating faster, hit that subscribe button. Right now, turn on notifications and follow along with me until the very last word. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Hannah Brooks had learned one truth about life by the time she turned 25. The world did not hold space for people like her. Not the banks when she walked in asking for help after her mother's hospital bills started arriving like a flood she couldn't outswim. Not the landlord who looked her up and down before deciding the apartment was already taken. Not the agencies who passed over her resume without a second glance, even when she showed up on time, dressed clean, ready to work whatever hours they needed. She was too much of one thing and not enough of another. Too heavy, too quiet, too poor, too real for a world that had decided long ago what kind of woman deserved to be seen. But Hannah kept moving anyway, because stopping was not something she knew how to do. She was up before the sun most mornings, 6 days a week, sometimes 7. She cleaned tables at a diner on Walker Drive before the breakfast crowd arrived, wiping syrup off vinyl seats and restocking sugar dispensers while the city was still dark and half asleep. From there, she took 2 buses across town to a residential laundry service where she sorted, wash, folded, and bagged other people's clothes for 4 hours. Then 3 afternoons a week, she sat beside elderly patients at a care facility in Pilsen, reading to them, holding their hands, talking to them about nothing and everything until their eyes grew soft and their breathing slowed into something that looked like peace. She did all of this without complaint, without drama, without asking anyone to notice. Because she didn't do it for applause. She did it to survive. And she did it because somewhere underneath all that exhaustion, Hannah Brooks still believed that if you worked hard enough and stayed honest long enough, something eventually had to give. The problem was Victor Kane. Victor Kane was the kind of man who had figured out a long time ago that there were people in this world who fell through cracks. People who had nobody powerful watching out for them. People who needed money desperately enough that they would sign papers they didn't fully understand in rooms that smelled like carpet cleaner and broken promises with pens handed to them by men in cheap suits who smiled too wide and talked too fast. He ran a private lending company out of a suite on the 14th floor of a building near the Loop. Nothing illegal on the surface, everything predatory underneath. Hannah's mother, Margaret Brooks, had borrowed from Victor Kane 3 years ago when her first diagnosis came back. The bills had started: small co-pays, medications, follow-up visits. Then the second diagnosis landed. Then the surgery. Then the long months in and out of the hospital that bled the family account down to nothing and kept bleeding. Margaret had signed with Victor Kane because there was no other option. Because the interest was listed in language that sounded manageable until you actually tried to calculate what it meant. Because when you are a sick woman with a daughter and no savings and no family left to call you, sign what is put in front of you, and you pray. Margaret died 14 months later. She left Hannah 3 things: a worn Bible with names written on the inside cover, a single photograph of the 2 of them at Navy Pier the summer Hannah turned 10, and a debt to Victor Kane that had grown through compounding interest and penalty fees to over $40,000. Hannah was not legally responsible for her mother's debts. She knew that. Victor Kane's own attorney had explained it to her in a phone call that lasted 3 minutes. But Victor Kane had ways of making people feel responsible anyway. He sent letters to her employers. He left voicemails with her landlord. He showed up at the diner twice, sitting in a booth with a cup of coffee and a newspaper, watching her work with flat, patient eyes until her manager started asking questions Hannah didn't know how to answer. He wasn't trying to collect money from her. He was trying to break her. Hannah understood that now. She understood it the way you understand a storm, when you've already been standing in the rain for so long that your bones hurt. You don't panic anymore. You just try to find somewhere dry to stand while you figure out your next move. That was what she was doing the afternoon she saw the listing. She almost missed it. She was sitting in the back of the second bus, the one that smelled like winter, and somebody's leftover lunch scrolling through her phone with chapped fingers checking job boards the way she did every evening. Not because she thought she'd find something new, but because stopping meant admitting she had run out of moves. The listing was buried between a warehouse position and a hotel cleaning job. It didn't have a logo. It didn't have a company name. Just a job title, private household caretaker, live-in position, and a salary figure that made Hannah read the line 3 times before she believed what her eyes were telling her. It was enough, more than enough. Enough to pay Victor Kane's debt in full. Enough to give her breathing room for the first time in 3 years. She clicked the link. The description was short and formal. A private family in the Lincoln Park area was seeking a full-time live-in caretaker for a young child age 3. The position included room board and full salary. Applicants must be patient, reliable, and experienced with childcare. References preferred, and interviews would be held at the family's private residence. There was a phone number. Hannah stared at it for a long time. She thought about all the reasons this was probably not for her. She wasn't a certified nanny. She didn't have formal training. She was 25 and overweight and wore clothes that she bought secondhand and pressed carefully on Sunday evenings so they'd hold their shape through the week. She had no business walking into a private residence in Lincoln Park and presenting herself as somebody worthy of the position. Then the bus hit a pothole. Her phone screen flickered and she thought about Victor Kane sitting in that diner booth watching her like she was already finished. She called the number. A woman answered. Cool, professional voice. She asked for Hannah's name, her experience, and her availability. Hannah answered every question without stumbling. She talked about the care facility. She talked about the elderly patients, the routines she kept the way she had learned to stay calm when someone was frightened or confused or refusing to cooperate. She talked about patience. She talked about showing up. There was a pause. Then the woman said, "Can you come Thursday at 10?" Hannah said yes. She didn't sleep Wednesday night. She pressed her best blouse. She found the only pair of shoes she owned without a scuff on the toe. She took the first bus of the morning and arrived at the address 35 minutes early and sat on a bench a block away, watching the neighborhood wake up, trying to talk herself into believing she had every right to be there. The Moretti estate did not look like anything she had imagined. It was tall and set back from the street, all dark stone and iron fencing and windows that reflected the sky in a way that made the house look like it was watching the world rather than being watched by it. There was a gate with a speaker and a camera mounted at eye level. A stone path led from the gate to the front entrance, lined with bare trees that looked like they'd been standing there longer than anyone alive could remember. Hannah walked to the gate at 5 minutes to 10 and pressed the button. "Name," said a voice. "Hannah Brooks. I have an appointment." A pause, then the gate opened. The woman who met her at the door was the same cool professional voice from the phone. Her name was Mrs. Ellison. She was perhaps 60 with steel gray hair pulled back from her face and a posture that suggested she had spent her entire life being competent and expected others to do the same. She looked Hannah over once quickly without expression and then said, "Follow me." She led Hannah through a hallway and into a formal sitting room where a man was standing with his back to the door looking out a window. Hannah knew who he was before he turned around. She had done what any person does before a job interview in the 21st century. She had searched the name attached to the address. Dominic Moretti, 41 years old, founder and CEO of Moretti Group, a private investment firm with reach into real estate logistics and financial services across 6 states. Featured in Chicago Magazine 4 years ago in a profile that called him methodical private and completely uninterested in your opinion of him. What the profile had not fully conveyed was the way he occupied a room. He wasn't loud. He didn't move dramatically. He simply turned from the window and looked at her, and the air in the room arranged itself around him the way it does around something with significant weight. He was tall and dark-haired, with eyes that were quiet in the way of someone who had learned to keep everything they were thinking exactly 1 layer below the surface. He looked at Hannah. She watched his eyes take in her clothes, her shoes, the shape of her, the simple way she had put herself together this morning with care and no illusions. He said nothing. Mrs. Ellison spoke. "Mr. Moretti, this is Miss Brooks." Dominic Moretti nodded once. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit down." Hannah sat. He asked her questions, Direct questions with no warmth and no small talk. How long had she worked as caregiving? What specific experience did she have with children versus adults? How did she handle a child who refused to cooperate? What was her method when a child was frightened? What would she do if a child was physically aggressive? Hannah answered every question directly. Without performing confidence she didn't feel, but without flinching either. She told him the truth that she didn't have a formal certificate, but she had spent hundreds of hours beside people who needed someone steady, and that she had never once left a patient or a child worse than she'd found them. When she finished, Dominic Moretti was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You should understand something before we go further. My daughter Sophia is 3 years old. In the past 18 months, she has gone through more disruption than any child should face. Her mother died in an accident when Sophia was 17 months old. Since then, we have employed 6 different caretakers. The most recent lasted 4 days." Hannah held his eyes. "Why did they leave?" His jaw tightened slightly. "Sophia is not an easy child right now. She doesn't trust strangers. When she feels threatened or overwhelmed, she becomes physical. She kicks, she bites, she throws." Nobody moved for what felt like a full minute. Sophia's small fingers were wrapped around Hannah's hands so tightly that Hannah could feel the child's pulse beating fast against her palm. The little girl was still wearing her pajamas, the ones with the small yellow stars on them, and her dark hair was tangled from sleep, and her cheeks were still flushed from crying. But she wasn't crying anymore. She was just standing there pressed against Hannah's side, staring up at her with eyes that were treated and serious and completely certain. Mrs. Ellison was the first one to find her voice. "Miss Brooks, perhaps you'd like to—" "Don't," Sophia said. One word, flat and absolute, directed at no one in particular, which somehow made it land on everyone. Dominic stood at the top of the staircase with one hand on the railing. He hadn't moved since the moment Sophia ran down. Hannah could feel his eyes on her the way you feel a change in air pressure, not dramatic, not loud, but impossible to ignore. She didn't look up at him. She looked down at the little girl holding her hand, and she did the only thing that felt natural. She crouched down to Sophia's level. "Hey," she said softly, "I'm Hannah." Sophia studied her face with the complete unself-conscious focus that only very small children and very old people ever truly use. She reached out with her free hand and touched Hannah's cheek the same way she might test whether something was real or a dream. Her fingers were warm and slightly stocky from whatever she'd had for breakfast. "You have kind eyes," Sophia said. Hannah felt something move in her chest. "Thank you, so do you." From the top of the stairs, Dominic Moretti said nothing, but Hannah heard him exhale a single controlled breath, and then the sound of him walking away down the upper hallway. Mrs. Ellison looked between Hannah and the child as if she was watching something she didn't have a category for. Then she straightened her spine, smoothed her jacket, and said with practiced efficiency, "Let me show you to your room." That was how it began. Not with paperwork, though the paperwork came later. Not with a formal welcome or a tour or anyone explaining the rules of the house with warmth and intention. It began with a 3-year-old girl holding a stranger's hand in a marble hallway, while rain tapped at the windows, and the rest of the household stood around them, trying to figure out what they had just witnessed. Hannah's room was on the 2nd floor, 2 doors down from Sophia's. It was larger than any room she had ever slept in. There was a window that faced the side garden, a bed with a headboard, and a small desk in the corner. She set her suitcase down and sat on the edge of the mattress and pressed both palms flat against her thighs and told herself to breathe. She had the job. She was here. The rest she would figure out as it came. She didn't know yet that figuring it out was going to be the hardest and most important work of her life. The first real test came at lunch. Mrs. Ellison informed Hannah that Sophia ate at noon in the small dining room off the kitchen and that the current protocol was for a staff member to sit with her while she ate, because Sophia had in the past used meal times as an opportunity to throw food and overturn her plate, and on one memorable occasion upend an entire pitcher of juice over the head of the previous nanny. Hannah listened to all of this without blinking. "What does she like to eat?" Hannah asked. Mrs. Ellison paused as if nobody had ever asked that question before. "She tolerates pasta. She refuses anything green. She went through a phase of only accepting food that was cut into triangles." "Is she still in that phase?" "We don't know. The last 3 nannies declined to find out." Hannah nodded. "Okay, I'll take it from here. She found Sophia in the playroom, sitting in the middle of the floor, surrounded by building blocks, ignoring them. The little girl looked up when Hannah came in, and something in her posture shifted, not quite relaxed, but less like a small animal ready to bolt. "Are you hungry?" Hannah asked. Sophia considered this with great seriousness. "Maybe. What if I told you I know how to make pasta shapes?" Sophia's eyes narrowed. "What kind of shapes? What kind do you want?" Another long pause. "Stars." Hannah went to the kitchen and introduced herself to the cook, a broad-shouldered man named Ray, who looked at her with the specific wariness of someone who had watched 11 adults fail at the same job and expected her to be the 12th. She asked if she could use the cutting board, in 15 minutes. Ray stepped aside without a word and watched from the corner while she worked. She carried the bowl back to the small dining room herself. Sophia was already sitting at the table, spine straight, watching the door with the intensity of a judge waiting for evidence. Hannah set the bowl down. Sophia looked at the pasta. The pasta had been cut imperfectly, but unmistakably into stars. Sophia picked up her fork. She ate every single bite. Ray, who had followed at a distance and was watching through the kitchen doorway, quietly turned around and went back to his station without saying a word. But that afternoon, when Hannah came to get a glass of water, she found a small plate of cookies sitting on the counter with no note attached. She understood. That was his version of welcome. The days that followed were not easy. Nobody who tells you that caring for a grieving 3-year-old is easy has ever actually done it. Sophia was not simply difficult. Sophia was in pain. She was a little person who had lost the most fundamental thing a child can lose at an age too young to have the words for what she was feeling, so she expressed it the only ways available to her, loudly, physically, and without warning. She had tantrums that came out of nowhere and lasted 40 minutes. She bit Hannah on the forearm on the third day hard enough to leave a mark, and then stood there shaking, eyes wide clearly, as frightened by what she had done as Hannah was. Hannah did not yell. She did not cry or threaten or leave the room. She sat down on the floor, pressed her arm against her side, and waited until Sophia's breathing slowed. Then she said, "That hurt. I need you to know that, but I'm still here." Sophia stared at her. Then she sat down on the floor across from her, and they stayed like that 3 feet apart until the tension finally leaked out of the room like air from a slow tire. That was the moment something changed between them. Not fixed, not even close to fixed, but shifted. Like a door that had been locked for a long time, clicking open just enough to let in light. Dominic Moretti was watching all of this. Not openly. He was not the kind of man who hovered or asked questions or showed up in doorways making his presence known. He ran his household the way Hannah imagined he ran his business, through information gathered quietly, assessed carefully, and acted upon only when necessary. Mrs. Ellison reported to him. The staff reported to him. He knew what was happening under his roof at all times, but he started appearing in places Hannah didn't expect. The evening of the 4th day, she was sitting with Sophia in the upstairs hallway, both of them on the floor with their backs against the wall, because Sophia had refused to go into her bedroom and Hannah had decided the hallway was fine. They were reading, Hannah reading aloud, Sophia following along with her finger tracing the pictures, and Hannah looked up and found Dominic standing at the end of the hall. He was still in his work clothes jacket, off sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he was looking at his daughter with an expression Hannah had not seen on him before. It lasted only a second. Then he registered that Hannah had seen him, and his face closed back into its default stillness, and he said, "Sophia, it's past 8. Sophia did not look up from the book. "One more page." The silence that followed was interesting. Hannah waited to see what he would do. Dominic Moretti, a man who was by all accounts accustomed to people doing what he said when he said it, stood in the hallway and said nothing for a moment. Then, and Hannah would think about this later, would hold it up in her mind and examine it. He said, "1 page." He didn't leave. He stood there while Hannah read the page. When she finished, Sophia closed the book, got up from the floor without argument, and walked to her bedroom. Hannah followed to tuck her in. When she came back out into the hallway, Dominic was gone, but his coffee mug was sitting on the hall table. He'd been standing there long enough to finish his coffee. 2 weeks in the household had begun to change in ways that were small but unmistakable. Ray started making Sophia's favorite breakfast on days when the little girl had a harder night. The 2 young housekeeping staff, a pair of women in their 30s named Greta and Tomas's wife Carmen, started saying good morning to Sophia in the hallways instead of careful silence. Even the security staff at the front gate A man everyone called Marcus, who had the build of someone who had been large since birth, started keeping a bag of crackers at his station because Sophia had decided on a walk one afternoon that Marcus was interesting, and interesting people deserve visits, and visits required snacks. Hannah had not organized any of this. She had simply been herself in all the ordinary ways, saying please and thank you, asking Shreway how his shift was going, stopping to let Sophia talk to Marcus for 10 minutes, even when it was cold. She treated the people in that house the way she had always treated people, which was the same way regardless of their title or function or how much power they held. It turned out that in a house that had been running on grief and formality for 18 months, ordinary human decency felt like water after a drought. Sophia was healing, slowly, unevenly, with setbacks that still left Hannah exhausted on the bathroom floor some nights, but healing. She started sleeping through the night more often than not. She started asking questions again, the endless, looping, wonderful questions of a 3-year-old mind reconnecting with its own curiosity. Why is the sky that color? Why does Ray wear an apron? Why does Daddy never sing? That last one Hannah didn't answer directly. She just said, maybe you should ask him. 3 days later at dinner, the first dinner Dominic had taken in the family dining room, in what Mrs. Ellison quietly told Hannah had been over a year, Sophia looked across the table at her father and said, Daddy, do you know any songs? Dominic looked at his daughter. Something passed across his face, a flicker fast and real. He said, I used to know a few. Will you sing one? He was quiet for a moment, then he said after dinner. He sang one song that night. Hannah heard it from the hallway where she had stepped to give them privacy, a low, slightly imperfect rendition of something old and half-remembered, and Sophia's laughter running through it like a thread of gold. Hannah pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes and felt something loosen in her own chest that she hadn't realized she'd been holding tight. But the thing about peace Hannah had learned is that it makes the thing trying to destroy it louder by contrast. She started getting the calls again. She had changed her number twice, but Victor Kane had resources and patience and a very specific kind of cruelty that expressed itself through persistence. He didn't leave long messages, just short ones, just enough to remind her he hadn't forgotten. Just enough to pull her back at odd hours from whatever warmth the day had offered. She never told anyone. She started looking tired in ways she couldn't fully hide. Greta noticed. Ray noticed. Mrs. Ellison, who noticed everything, certainly noticed. But none of them asked directly because they were still feeling their way through the new version of this household, and asking direct personal questions of the nanny was not in anyone's established protocol. Dominic noticed too. He said nothing for a week. Then one evening, he passed her in the hallway near his study and stopped. He didn't turn around. He stood with his back to her and said without preamble, You're not sleeping. It wasn't a question. Hannah stopped walking. I'm fine, she said. He turned then slowly. He looked at her with those quiet, measuring eyes, and she understood in a way that made her chest tighten that he was a man who had spent a very long time reading rooms and people, and knowing when he was being given the easy answer instead of the true one. My daughter laughed 4 times today, he said. Real laughing, the kind she hasn't done since before. He paused. That's because of you. Hannah didn't know what to do with that, so she said nothing. Whatever is keeping you up at night, he said. You don't have to handle it alone. She almost told him. The words were right there at the back of her throat, lined up and ready. She swallowed them back down. I appreciate that, she said carefully. I'm okay. He held her eyes for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he nodded once and walked into his study and closed the door. Hannah stood in the hallway for a long moment. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she didn't fully understand why. Then her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and looked at the screen. Victor Kane, again. She turned the phone face down and pressed it against her sternum and stood there until the shaking stopped. She didn't know that Dominic Moretti had not gone to his desk when he walked into that study. She didn't know that he had stood just inside the closed door listening to the silence in the hallway, his jaw tight, his mind working through something with the quiet, thorough intensity he brought to everything that mattered to him. She didn't know that he had already noticed the name on the caller ID the one time her phone had rung at the dinner table, and she'd silenced it too quickly and set it face down with hands that weren't quite steady. She didn't know that Dominic Moretti, who had survived and built an empire, by understanding exactly who was trying to take something from people he cared about, had already begun making inquiries. She didn't know any of that yet. What she knew was that Sophia had laughed 4 times today, and that somewhere underneath the fear and the exhaustion and the weight of everything Victor Kane represented, that fact was the most solid thing she had to stand on. She walked back down the hallway toward Sophia's room to check that the nightlight was on. She didn't hear the study door open quietly behind her. She didn't hear Dominic step back into the hall and watch her go with an expression on his face that Mrs. Ellison, passing at the far end of the corridor with a stack of folded linens, had never seen on him before. Not in 4 years of working in this house. Not once. Mrs. Ellison kept walking, but she was smiling by the time she reached the linen closet in the careful, private way of a woman who has seen enough of life to recognize when something real is beginning, even when the people inside it are the last ones to know. The morning everything started to unravel began the same way most mornings had begun for the past 6 weeks, with Sophia's voice coming through the baby monitor at 6:47, not crying, just talking to herself in the low, wandering way she did when she was still half in a dream. Hannah was already awake. She had been awake since 4. The calls had started again the night before, and this time Victor Kane had not left a short message. This time he had left 3, each one a little louder than the last. She listened to Sophia's voice through the monitor and pressed her palm flat against her sternum and told herself the same thing she had been telling herself for 6 weeks. One day at a time, just today, just this morning. Just get up and go down the hall and start the day, and don't let what's happening in the dark bleed into what's happening in the light. She got up, she went down the hall. Sophia was sitting up in bed with both arms raised, waiting to be picked up, which was new. 4 weeks ago, Sophia had not let anyone carry her. 3 weeks ago, she had tolerated it. Now she raised her arms and leaned forward and said, "Up, please," with the particular confidence of a child who has decided that someone is safe and intends to use that safety fully. Hannah picked her up and held her close, and Sophia put her chin on Hannah's shoulder, and they stood there by the window for a moment, neither of them speaking, while the city outside began its slow gray morning. "You smell like worry," Sophia said. Hannah pulled back and looked at her. "I smell like what?" "Worry. Daddy smells like that sometimes. At night." Hannah held the little girl's gaze for a moment, 3 years old and already fluent in the emotional weather of the people around her. Hannah thought about Margaret, her own mother, who used to say that children feel everything adults try to hide. They just don't have words for it until someone teaches them. Sophia had the words. That alone told Hannah something important about the woman who had raised her for 17 months before the accident. "I'm okay," Hannah said. Sophia patted her cheek once. "Okay," she said, clearly unconvinced, and reached for the hair tie on Hannah's wrist to play with. Downstairs, the day moved at its regular pace. Ray made eggs. Carmen ran the vacuum in the front rooms. Marcus switched out with the morning security detail at the gate. Mrs. Ellison appeared at 8:30 with the day's schedule printed on a single sheet of paper, which she handed to Hannah with the efficiency of a woman who had been organizing other people's lives for 30 years and saw no reason to apologize for it. It was at 9:15 while Sophia was in the sunroom with her building blocks, and Hannah was drinking her second cup of coffee in the kitchen doorway, that her phone rang. Not a call from Victor Kane, a call from a number she didn't recognize with a Chicago area code. She answered it. "Miss Brooks?" The voice was male, formal, and careful in the way of someone delivering a message they have been paid to deliver without personal investment. "My name is Andrew Foss. I'm a legal representative for Victor Kane Financial Services. I'm calling to notify you that Mr. Kane intends to pursue civil action related to outstanding debt in the amount of $42,630, originally contracted by Margaret Brooks, and subsequently, I am not legally responsible for my mother's debt," Hannah said. Her voice was level. She had said this before, to this kind of voice in this kind of call. "I've been told that clearly by multiple attorneys. Mr. Kane is not pursuing you as a primary debtor." The voice continued smooth and unmoved. "He is, however, prepared to file a public complaint with the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, citing your current employment as potentially fraudulent, given certain omissions in your employment application. He is also prepared to contact your current employer directly." Hannah's hand tightened on the phone. "That is harassment. Mr. Kane considers it notification. He's prepared to hold on this action for 72 hours. during which time he would welcome a conversation about resolution. A pause. He also asked me to mention that he's aware of where you're currently employed. He said you would understand what that means. The line went quiet. Hannah stood in the kitchen doorway and listened to her own heartbeat for 3 full seconds. Then she said, "Tell Mr. Kane I received his message." And she ended the call. Ray was at the counter. He had heard everything. He didn't look at her directly, but he set down the dish he was drying and picked up his coffee mug and said to the window above the sink, "Whatever it is, this house has seen worse and come through the other side." Hannah looked at the back of his head. "Ray? I'm just saying." She didn't respond. She put her phone in her pocket and went back to the sunroom and sat on the floor next to Sophia and picked up a building block and started to build something without knowing what it was going to be, because she needed her hands to be doing something while her mind worked through what came next. Sophia watched her for a moment. Then she picked up a block and placed it carefully on top of Hannah's. "Tower," she announced. "Yeah," Hannah said. "Tower." They built it 12 blocks high before it fell. By afternoon, Hannah had made a decision. She would not wait for Victor Kane to move first. She would go to him directly, offer whatever she could put together, a payment plan, a formal agreement, something with a lawyer's signature on it, and she would buy herself time. It wasn't a good plan. It wasn't even close to a good plan. But it was the only leverage she had, which was the willingness to show up and look the problem in the face instead of waiting for it to come find her. She didn't tell anyone in the house. She arranged for Carmen to sit with Sophia during the afternoon rest period and told Mrs. Ellison she had a personal errand. Mrs. Ellison looked at her for a moment with those sharp, experienced eyes and said, "Will you be back by 5?" Hannah said yes. Mrs. Ellison said, "Then go." She took the bus, not because she didn't have access to the household car service for personal use. Mrs. Ellison had explained that perk in the first week, but because sitting on a bus gave her 40 minutes to think, and thinking was what she needed. She got off 4 blocks from Victor Kane's office building and walked the rest of the way. She had called ahead. His assistant had put her on hold for 3 minutes and then come back and said Mr. Kane could see her at 2:30. That was how Hannah knew he had been expecting this. That was how she knew he had engineered the 72-hour window, specifically to produce exactly this moment, her walking into his building, voluntarily on his turf, on his terms. Because she was scared, and he knew it. She walked in anyway. The elevator opened on the 14th floor, and Victor Kane was already standing in the reception area. He was shorter than she remembered from the diner booth, shorter and softer, with the particular physical quality of a man who had spent years letting money do the work his body no longer wanted to. He wore an expensive suit badly. He smiled at her the way cats smile at birds through glass. "Miss Brooks," he said, "I appreciate you coming in." "Let's skip the part where you pretend this is a courtesy," Hannah said. "Tell me what you actually want." Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite respect, but the recalibration of someone who expected easier prey. He gestured toward a conference room and she followed him in, and they sat across from each other at a table that probably cost more than she had made in the last year. He wanted $20,000, not the full amount. $20,000 in a lump sum within 30 days. In exchange, he would sign a formal release of any further claim. He would cease all contact with her employers, and he would formally close his company's file on Margaret Brooks's account. $20,000, Hannah said. "I'm being generous," he said, "given the full amount and the legal fees I could attach." "You're being strategic," she said. "You know I don't have $20,000. You know I can't get it in 30 days. So what you're actually doing is setting up a clock so that when it runs out, you can say, 'I had a chance and I didn't take it.'" His smile didn't change, but his eyes did slightly. "You're smarter than I expected." "My mother was smarter than you expected too," Hannah said quietly. That didn't save her. The room went very still. Victor Kane leaned back in his chair. 20,000, 30 days. That's the offer, Miss Brooks. I'd encourage you to think carefully." Hannah stood up. "I'll think about it." She walked out of the building and stood on the sidewalk in the cold and did not let herself feel anything until she was back on the bus and the city was moving past the window, and she was far enough away that falling apart wouldn't cost her anything she couldn't afford. She let herself feel it then, just for the length of 4 city blocks. The weight of it, the unfairness of carrying something her mother had signed in desperation and never been able to put down. The exhaustion of being the person who gets handed the bill for other people's cruelty and told to be grateful it wasn't worse. 4 blocks. Then she dried her face with the back of her hand, straightened her spine, and rode the rest of the way home. She was back by 5. What she didn't know and wouldn't know until much later was that she had been followed to that building, not by Victor Kane's people, by Marcus. Marcus, who had said nothing to Hannah that morning when he'd watched her leave through the front gate on foot instead of in the car. Marcus, who had been employed by the Moretti household for 7 years and who understood without being told explicitly that his job included paying attention to things that didn't feel right. Marcus, who had sent a 2-sentence text to Dominic Moretti at 2:45 that afternoon that read, "She went to Kane Financial Services on Whacker. I've been outside for 20 minutes, waiting on your call." Dominic had been in a meeting in his downtown office when the text came through. He had read it once, then he had excused himself from the meeting without explanation, which was something he had not done in 11 years of running his company, and walked to the window of his private office and stood there looking at the city below him with his phone in his hand and something moving through him that was not quite anger and not quite fear, but contained elements of both pressed together into something harder and more purposeful than either one alone. He called Marcus back in 45 seconds. "Don't approach her," he said. "Make sure she gets back safely. Then come see me tonight." He went back into the meeting. He sat down. He answered 3 questions from his financial team and approved 1 contract amendment and said nothing to anyone about where his mind actually was for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, Hannah tucked Sophia in at 7:30. The little girl had been quieter than usual all evening, with the particular attentiveness of a child whose emotional radar is operating at full sensitivity without knowing why. At bedtime, she held Hannah's hand and didn't let go for a long time. "Are you still going to be here tomorrow?" Sophia asked. The question hit Hannah somewhere she wasn't braced for. "Of course I am." "Promise." Hannah looked at that small, serious face and thought about $20,000 in 30 days and Victor Kane's flat, patient smile. She thought about her mother's handwriting in the Bible. She thought about the building they had built this morning, 12 blocks high, before it fell. "I promise," she said. Sophia let go of her hand. "Okay, you can turn off the light now." Hannah turned off the light and closed the door and stood in the hallway for a moment with her eyes closed. Then she heard footsteps at the end of the hall and opened her eyes and found Dominic standing 10 feet away watching her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the closed, careful face he wore in the mornings. Not the tired, quietly sad face she had glimpsed once or twice late at night. Something different, something more direct. "Come downstairs," he said. Not a demand, not a request. Something in between, spoken in the tone of a man who has decided it is time to stop waiting. She followed him to the study. He closed the door. He did not sit behind his desk. He stood near the fireplace and looked at her and said without preamble, "Victor Kane, tell me everything." Hannah opened her mouth to say, "I'm handling it." She looked at his face. She closed her mouth. She sat down in the chair near the fireplace and she told him. All of it, her mother's illness, the loans, the debt she had inherited not legally but emotionally in the way children always inherit the unfinished weight of the people who love them, the calls, the diner, the message from the attorney that morning, the meeting that afternoon in the conference room on the 14th floor. She told him the number, $20,000, 30 days. She told him everything except how afraid she was because that part she couldn't make words out of. But she didn't need to. It was in her voice whether she wanted it there or not. When she finished, Dominic was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because it's not your problem," she said. "Hannah." He said her name like he was setting something down carefully. "Look at what you've done in this house in 6 weeks. Look at my daughter." He paused. "This is exactly my problem." She felt her throat tighten. "I don't want to be someone else's problem. I've been other people's problem my whole life, and She stopped, pressed her lips together. "That's not what I said," he said quietly. "I said, it's my problem, not that you are." The distinction landed somewhere in the middle of her chest and sat there. "Kane is going to contact you," she said. "He threatened to come here, to the house. Let him come." The flatness in those 3 words was different from the flatness she usually heard from him. This was not emotional distance. This was the absolute grounded stillness of a man who has assessed a threat and found it significantly smaller than the person presenting it believes it to be. "Dominic, I have people who handle exactly this kind of situation," he said. "Financial investigators, attorneys who specialize in predatory lending law. Kane's operation has been under regulatory scrutiny for 3 years. He's been careful enough to stay just inside the line. He paused. But nobody who operates the way he does stays inside the line perfectly. Not across every account, not across every file. He looked at her steadily. He made a mistake the moment he came after someone in my house. Hannah stared at him. Technically I work for you, but that doesn't mean you're obligated to, Hannah. There it was again, her name set down carefully. Stop telling me what I'm obligated to. I know what I'm obligated to. I'm telling you what I want to do. The room was very quiet for a moment. Why? She asked. It came out smaller than she intended. He held her gaze and said with complete steadiness, because Sophia asked me this evening at dinner if you were going to be here tomorrow. And when I said yes, she said good because Hannah promised, and Hannah doesn't break her promises. He paused. I'd like to make sure you don't have to. Hannah looked down at her hands. She was gripping the arm of the chair without realizing it. She made herself let go. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, he said. She stood to leave. She was at the door when he said behind her, Hannah. She turned. You're not carrying this alone anymore, he said. That's not a discussion. She nodded once and walked out into the hallway and made it all the way to the staircase before she had to stop and press both hands against the banister and breathe through something that wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite relief but felt like the moment right before both. When your body finally understands that it is allowed to put down the thing it has been carrying so long, it forgot it was heavy. 3 floors up, Sophia was already asleep. One hand curled under her cheek, the nightlight making small gold circles on the ceiling above her. 2 floors down, Dominic Moretti was on his phone. His voice was quiet and very precise. He was talking to his lead investigator. He was saying, I want everything, every account, every complaint, every file they ever opened on a borrower who couldn't fight back. I want it by Monday. A pause. Yes, all of it. Outside, the city moved on in its ordinary way, indifferent and enormous. But inside the walls of the Moretti estate, something was gathering. Not noise, not drama. Something quieter than that and far more dangerous to the people who deserved to be afraid of it. The slow, focused, absolutely certain momentum of a man who has decided to move aimed precisely at the man who thought Hannah Brooks had no one in her corner. Victor Kane had spent years understanding which people were alone in the world. He had made one very serious miscalculation. The Monday after that conversation in the study, Hannah woke up and waited for something bad to happen. That was the honest truth of it. She had spent so many years in survival mode that the absence of immediate crisis felt less like safety and more like the pause before the next thing hit. She made Sophia's breakfast. She tied the little girl's shoes. She answered Sophia's 17 consecutive questions about why birds don't wear shoes with the patience of someone who had decided that 17 questions about bird footwear was exactly the kind of problem she wanted to have. And underneath all of it, she waited. Nothing came, not Monday, not Tuesday. On Wednesday morning, Mrs. Ellison knocked on Hannah's door at 7:15, which was unusual enough that Hannah's stomach dropped before the woman even opened her mouth. But Mrs. Ellison's face was not carrying bad news. It was carrying the particular expression of someone delivering information they find professionally interesting and personally satisfying. She said, Mr. Moretti asked me to let you know that his legal team made contact with the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation yesterday afternoon. They submitted a formal complaint against Kane Financial Services, supported by documentation from 14 former borrowers. She paused. He also asked me to tell you that your presence is not required at any proceeding and that you should, and I'm quoting directly here, stop waiting for the ceiling to fall. Hannah stared at her. Mrs. Ellison allowed herself a small, controlled smile. His words, not mine. Sophia's asking for you. She wants the star-shaped pancakes. She turned and walked back down the hallway with the smooth efficiency of a woman who had delivered her message and considered her work complete. Hannah stood in her doorway for a moment. Then she laughed. It came out of her unexpectedly short and real, the kind of laugh that happens when relief and disbelief arrive at exactly the same time, and your body doesn't know which one to process first. She pressed her hand over her mouth, collected herself, and went to make star-shaped pancakes. But the ceiling, as it turned out, was not finished. Victor Kane called her at noon that day. She almost didn't answer. Then she thought about what Dominic had said, This is not your problem to carry alone anymore, and she answered it. I know what he's doing, Victor said. His voice had changed. The smooth, patient quality was gone. What was underneath it was uglier and more honest. Moretti thinks filing a regulatory complaint makes me go away. I've had 3 of those. I'm still here. Then why are you calling me? Hannah asked. Because this isn't over, he said. Whatever he's told you, whatever he's promised you, men like Dominic Moretti don't protect people like you, Hannah. They use them, and when they're done using them, they let them go and they don't look back. You're a nanny, a temporary convenience, and when he's finished with you, I'll still be here. Hannah was quiet for a moment. She could hear her own breathing. She could hear from 2 rooms away, Sophia singing something tuneless and happy to herself. Victor, she said finally, I'm going to say something to you, and I need you to hear it clearly. I am not afraid of you anymore. I was. For a long time I was, but I'm not now. And you calling me to tell me that the people who care about me will eventually stop caring, that's not a threat. That's just you telling me you've never had anyone stay. She paused. I'm sorry for that, but I'm not going to let it be my problem. She hung up. Her hands were shaking, but it was a different kind of shaking than before. Not fear shaking, the kind that comes after you've said the true thing out loud for the first time and your body is adjusting to what that costs. She didn't tell Dominic about the call right away. She would later. But in that moment, she needed to sit with it alone for a little while, the way you sit with a wound after it's been cleaned, not because it still hurts the same way, but because you need to feel that the worst of it is over. 3 days later, Dominic's lead investigator, a compact, precise woman named Diane Cho, came to the house and sat across from Hannah at the kitchen table with a folder she did not open. She said, we've identified 47 accounts where Kane's fee structure violated state lending regulations. 11 of those borrowers have agreed to be named in a civil complaint. The regulatory body has escalated to a formal investigation. She paused. The debt attached to your mother's account is legally invalid under 3 separate grounds. We have a filing ready. Your signature is not required, but your permission to proceed on your behalf is. Hannah looked at the closed folder. What does this mean for my mother's account specifically? It means the debt is gone, Diane said plainly. Formally, legally, completely. Kane cannot contact you, your employer, or any future employer about it. If he does, it constitutes harassment under Illinois law, and we move to criminal referral immediately. She paused. We also have enough to pursue his lending license. That process will take time, but it has begun. Hannah sat very still. How much did this cost? Diane looked at her steadily. Mr. Moretti handles his own legal fees. That's not what I asked. I know. Diane picked up the folder and stood. Miss Brooks, in my experience, when someone like Dominic Moretti decides something is worth doing, the cost of it is not the part he thinks about first. She set a single-page document on the table. Sign where it's indicated if you want us to proceed. You have until Friday. Hannah signed it that afternoon. She signed it at the kitchen table with Ray pretending to be very interested in the contents of the refrigerator 10 feet away, and Carmen suddenly discovering that the counter near the window needed wiping, and she did not say anything to either of them, and neither of them said anything to her, and somehow that shared silent witnessing was exactly right. She brought the signed document to Dominic's study that evening after Sophia was in bed. He was at his desk, jacket off, reading something on his laptop. He looked up when she knocked on the open door. She held up the document. I signed it. He nodded. Good. She took 2 steps into the room. Thank you. I mean that, genuinely. What you're doing, I don't have the right words for it. He looked at her for a moment. You don't need to thank me. I do, she said, because nobody has ever done anything like this for me. And I need to say it out loud at least once so that I know I did. He was quiet. Something moved through his expression that he didn't entirely control, a flicker of something real and unguarded there for a second, and then smoothed back into stillness. Hannah, he said, can I ask you something? Yes. Why did you come back that first day after Sophia, after the first hour with the blocks and the biting? Most people would have walked out. Hannah thought about it honestly. Because she wasn't being mean, she said finally. She was being honest. She was saying, I've been hurt and I don't trust you yet, and I need you to prove you're not going to leave. That's not bad behavior. That's just pain wearing the only clothes it has. She paused. I know what that looks like because I've worn those clothes myself. Dominic said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. Elena, Sophia's mother, she used to say that the hardest thing about loving a child is that you can't take their pain for them. You can only stay close enough that they don't have to feel it alone. It was the first time he had said his wife's name in Hannah's presence. The room held very still around it. She sounds like she was wonderful, Hannah said carefully. She was. He looked down at his desk. She would have liked you. She had no patience for people who performed kindness. She said you could always tell the difference between someone who was kind because it cost them nothing and someone who was kind because they'd chosen it despite everything. He looked back up. She would have liked you a great deal. Hannah felt the back of her eyes sting. She did not let it go further than that. I should let you get back to work, she said. Hannah. She stopped at the door. The charity gala for the Children's Medical Foundation is Saturday, he said. I go every year. It's a significant event most of Chicago's business and civic community attends. He paused. I'd like you to come with me, not as Sophia's caretaker, as my guest. The silence lasted long enough that she could hear the clock on his bookshelf. Dominic, I know what you're about to say, he said. You're going to tell me you don't belong there, that it's not your world, that people will look at you and make judgments and it will be uncomfortable. He held her eyes. All of that is probably true. I'm asking you anyway. She looked at him standing there behind his desk. This man who had built an empire and lost his wife and raised a daughter who threw crystal figurines and had somehow in the space of 6 weeks started singing tunelessly to herself while she played. This man who had sat outside his daughter's bedroom door in the dark and listened to Hannah read bedtime stories and said nothing about it because he was still learning how to let people in. Okay, she said quietly. His expression didn't change dramatically, but something in his posture shifted very slightly in the way of someone who has been carrying tension they didn't fully acknowledge until it eased. Okay, he said. Saturday, 7 o'clock. She went back to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall for a while. Then she texted Greta, who responded in 45 seconds with 17 consecutive exclamation points and an offer to help with her hair. Saturday arrived with the specific high-stakes energy of a day that knows it is important. Sophia was aware something was happening. Children always are. She followed Hannah around all morning with her building blocks, not building anything, just carrying them, which was her version of saying, I need to be near you. At 3 in the afternoon, she climbed into Hannah's lap while Hannah was reading and said with great seriousness, You look pretty today. Hannah kissed the top of her head. Thank you, baby. Are you coming back tonight? I'll be back before you wake up tomorrow, I promise. Sophia considered this. Can Marcus stay outside my door? Hannah almost smiled. I'll ask him. Marcus said yes without being asked. Hannah had the sense he had already arranged it. At 6:45, Hannah came downstairs. Greta had done something skilled and understated with her hair. She was wearing the only formal dress she owned, a deep blue dress she had bought 3 years ago for a work event she had ultimately been too tired to attend, and she had worn it to exactly 0 occasions since. It fit differently now than it had 3 years ago. She was not smaller, not larger, just herself fully and without apology. And she had spent 40 minutes in front of the mirror making peace with that before she came down. Dominic was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at her, not a quick, polite glance, a real look, the kind that takes its time. Then he said simply, You look beautiful. Hannah had been prepared for many things. She had not been prepared for the complete absence of performance in those 3 words. He said it the way he said everything, without decoration, without strategy, like a fact. Thank you, she said, and meant it. The gala was everything Hannah had quietly dreaded and several things she hadn't anticipated. The room was full of precisely the kind of people she had spent her whole life aware she was not polished, connected, wearing the particular ease of those who have never had to calculate whether they belonged somewhere before they walked in. She felt their eyes on her the moment she entered. Beside Dominic, felt the quick assessments, the brief recalibrations. She kept her spine straight and her chin level and thought about Sophia asking if she was coming back and decided that whatever happened in this room, she had survived harder things. Dominic did not leave her side. That was the thing she would remember most later about that night. Not the room, not the people, not the event itself. The fact that he stayed beside her. He introduced her not as his daughter's caretaker, but by her name, simply as if her name were sufficient context, which she was slowly understanding. It was to him it was. They had been there perhaps 40 minutes when she felt a shift in the room, a change in the air pressure of the social environment, the particular drop in ambient noise that happens when something unexpected walks through a door. She turned. Victor Kane was standing at the entrance. He was dressed well and holding a glass and scanning the room with the deliberate calm of a man who has planned exactly this. His eyes moved across the crowd and found Hannah with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly where to look. His expression did not change. He raised his glass very slightly, just enough to acknowledge that he saw her. Hannah felt the cold move through her all at once, from her throat to her stomach. She did not move. She kept her face still. Beside her, she felt Dominic go very quiet, not tense, not reactive, quiet in the specific, focused way of someone who has identified what requires their attention and is now entirely concentrated on it. "He's here," Hannah said, barely above a murmur. "I see him," Dominic said. "Dominic." "Stay here," he said, and then he moved. What happened next lasted approximately 4 minutes. Dominic crossed the room without hurrying. People moved out of his path without being asked the way they do around someone whose sense of direction is absolute. He reached Victor Kane and stood in front of him and said something Hannah could not hear from where she stood. Victor's expression shifted. The performance of easy confidence cracked at the edges. He said something back. Dominic responded. Victor's jaw tightened. He said something louder this time, loud enough that the people immediately around them went still and turned to look. Hannah started moving towards them before she made the decision to. She was 3 feet away when she heard Victor say clearly now, "You have no idea who you're protecting. Ask her sometime what she was doing before she walked into your house. Ask her what she owes. Ask her what kind of woman takes a job in a rich man's home and doesn't tell him what she's running from." The room had gone quiet in that spreading, inevitable way of rooms where something real is about to happen in a place designed for everything to be managed and controlled. Dominic looked at Victor Kane for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was completely level and completely audible and completely without performance. "I know exactly who she is," he said. "She's the woman who put my daughter back together when I didn't know how. She's the person this entire household has been better for since the day she walked in. And she's here tonight because I asked her to be, not because she has anything to prove to you or anyone else in this room." He paused. "And if you have a concern about her debt history, you should take it up with my legal team, who filed a formal complaint about your operation with the state regulatory board 11 days ago. They're very interested in hearing from you." Victor Kane said nothing. The glass in his hand was very still. "You're going to leave now," Dominic said. It wasn't a suggestion. Victor looked at Hannah. One long, flat look that was supposed to mean something, supposed to land on her the way all his looks had always landed, with the weight of someone who knows you're alone. She looked back at him and felt for the first time that the weight wasn't there, that the look had traveled the distance between them and found nothing to attach to. He left. The room exhaled. Conversations resumed in that careful social way that means everyone is going to be talking about this for weeks, but we'll pretend for the next 10 minutes that it was nothing. Hannah stood in the middle of it and felt Dominic come back to stand beside her, close enough that his arm was against hers. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said, and she was, which surprised her. "I am." He looked at her for a moment. "I meant what I said." "I know," she said. "That's why it worked." They stood there together while the room moved around them, and Hannah understood, in the particular cellular way, that you understand the things that are going to change your life, that something had just shifted permanently. Not just in the room, not just in the way other people would now understand who she was in relation to this man and this family. Inside her, in the place where she had kept for 25 years, the quiet, insistent belief that she was the kind of person other people walk past. That belief had taken a very specific kind of damage tonight, the kind it doesn't come back from. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know what Dominic meant by the future, or whether what she felt when he stood beside her was something he felt too, or what any of it looked like on the other side of this evening. She didn't need to know all of it tonight. What she knew was that Victor Kane had walked into that room expecting to find her alone. And she had not been alone. And that fact, simple as it was, had changed something in her that she was going to spend a long time learning the full shape of. Across the city in the Moretti estate, Marcus was sitting in the hallway outside Sophia's room with a book he wasn't reading because he had told the little girl he would be there, and he was a man who kept his word. Inside the room, Sophia was asleep with one hand under her cheek and a small smile that nobody who saw it would have been able to explain, except perhaps as the particular expression of a child whose body knows even in sleep that the people she loves are coming home. You said part 5 Louis Viet du bangin bon trum đến 3.800 từ, liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại, tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Part 5 Louis Viet đủ 3.400 đến 3.800 từ, liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng, đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động, cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần 5 đạt điểm 10/10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh, sửa lối AI. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3 dự độ kịch tính, không viết lan man. Kết thúc dùng câu khẳng định mạnh để khép lại câu chuyện rõ ràng, trọn vẹn. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang mục document 10. 2 đến 3 phút cần có mini climax và đắt 10 đến 15 mini climax, mỗi phần cứ 10 đến 12 phút có một twist lớn sâu sắc. Đan xen mini cliffhanger mạnh hơn, tăng tính tự nhiên cho phản ứng của các nhân vật, thêm nhịp điệu, kịch tính thực tế và gần gũi. Mỗi 8 đến 10 phút cần có móc giữ chân khán giả. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh, viết văn bản phù hợp với TTS và chỉ cần viết nội dung và viết đúng lệnh nhé. Show more 0911, Claude responded. Part 5, A New Family. Part 5, A New Family. The drive home from the gala was quiet in the way that feels full rather than empty. Hannah sat in the passenger seat and watched the city move past the window and didn't feel the need to fill the silence with anything. That was new for her. She had spent most of her life filling silences with apologies, with explanations, with the careful, exhausting labor of making other people comfortable with her presence. Tonight, she just sat and the city moved, and beside her, Dominic drove with one hand on the wheel and said nothing. And the nothing between them was warm. They were 3 blocks from the estate when he spoke. How are you doing, honestly? She considered the question the way it deserved to be considered. I feel like something got lifted off me tonight. Something I had been carrying so long, I stopped noticing the weight. She paused. And now that it's gone, I keep reaching for it. Like when you take off a heavy coat and your shoulders keep bracing for something that isn't there anymore. He was quiet for a moment. That takes time to stop doing. Is that from experience? He glanced at her briefly. After Elena died, I kept reaching for the phone to call her. For 8 months, something would happen with Sophia. With work, anything, and my first instinct was to call Elena. And then I'd remember. And the remembering was its own thing every time. He returned his eyes to the road. The body takes longer to learn things than the mind does. Hannah absorbed that. How did you get through it? Sophia, he said immediately. No hesitation. She needed me to be present, not healed, not finished grieving, just present. And showing up for her every day gave me something to organize myself around until I could figure out how to organize myself again on my own. He paused. And then you came. The last 3 words landed simply without drama, which was exactly why they hit so hard. Hannah looked at her hands in her lap. I'm not sure I did anything extraordinary. I just showed up. Hannah, he said, do you have any idea how rare that is to simply show up? Without agenda, without performance, without calculating what you'll get in return. He shook his head slightly. I've been around powerful people my entire adult life. I can count on one hand the ones who do that. She didn't answer right away. The estate gate appeared ahead of them, the stone pillars lit against the dark, and Marcus was visible in the security booth and raised a hand as they pulled through. Thank you for tonight, she said finally. For what you said in there. You didn't have to, Hannah. I know you're going to tell me to stop thanking you. I'm going to tell you to stop being surprised that someone means what they say about you. He pulled to a stop in front of the entrance. He turned and looked at her directly. You deserve people who mean it. You've always deserved that. The fact that it took this long for the right ones to find you is not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of your bad luck up until now. She looked back at him. Her throat was tight. You say things very directly. I've wasted enough time saying things indirectly. She nodded once slowly. Then she got out of the car and he got out and they walked inside and neither of them said another word about it that night. But something had been established between them clear and solid as poured concrete and both of them knew it. Upstairs, Sophia was exactly where Marcus had said she'd be asleep, one hand under her cheek, the nightlight making its small gold circles. Hannah stood into the doorway for a moment and looked at her and felt something so large and so specific that she didn't have a name for it. It wasn't maternal exactly, though it held elements of that. It was the feeling of recognizing that a person has become necessary to you, that the shape of your days has reorganized itself around them so completely that you can no longer fully imagine the days without them. She pulled the door closed quietly and went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and stayed there for a long time before she slept. The next 2 months moved differently than anything before them. The regulatory investigation into Kane Financial Services escalated in the third week of November when a former employee provided internal documentation confirming that the fee structure had been deliberately obscured from borrowers. Diane Cho called Hannah on a Tuesday morning to tell her that the state had issued a formal suspension of Kane's lending license pending full review. She said it with the same level professional tone she used for everything, but at the end of the call she added, "Without being asked, your mother's file has been formally closed and expunged. There is no record of the debt." She paused. "I thought you should hear that specifically." Hannah was sitting at the kitchen table when the call came. Ray was across the room. When she lowered the phone, he looked at her face and said, "Good news." "Yeah," she said. "Really good news." He nodded once and slid a plate of toast across the counter to her without comment. She ate every bite. Victor Kane called her one more time. It was a Saturday morning early and she almost didn't answer and then decided she wanted to. He didn't say anything threatening. His voice was different now, flatter, drained of the practiced authority it used to carry. He said, "I want you to know this isn't over." But he said it the way people say things when they already know they're not true, when they're saying them more for their own benefit than the listeners. Hannah said, "Take care of yourself, Victor." And she meant it in the particular way you mean something when you have genuinely stopped being afraid of a person and can afford to wish them something decent. She hung up. He never called again. Sophia turned 4 in December. The birthday party was not large. Sophia had specifically requested only "my people," which she defined with complete 4-year-old authority as Hannah Dominic Ray, Mrs. Ellison Marcus Carmen Greta, and a girl from her preschool named Lily who had red shoes and laughs the right way. Dominic had listened to this guest list with great seriousness and said he would arrange it exactly as specified. Sophia had said, "Good, and the cake has to be stars." Ray had said, from the kitchen doorway, "Already planned." Sophia had given him a look of profound approval. The party was on a Sunday afternoon. The kitchen table was covered with a cloth that Greta had found somewhere in the back of a linen closet, white with small yellow flowers, and Ray had made a cake with stars on it that was almost certainly architecturally unsound and entirely perfect. Sophia sat at the head of the table in the particular way of someone who knows this day is entirely theirs and intends to use every second of it. When it came to time for presents, Sophia opened each one with the focused, deliberate attention of a child who understands that the gift represents the person, not just the object. She held each item up and looked at the giver directly before saying, "Thank you," which was something Hannah had never taught her, and which made Mrs. Ellison press her lips together in the careful, private way she had when something moved her and she preferred not to show it. When she got to Hannah's gift, a small cloth-covered journal with Hannah's handwriting on the first page, just the words, "These are pages for your stories." Sophia held it for a long time. She turned it over in her hands. She looked up at Hannah. She said, "Will you help me fill it?" Hannah felt the back of her eyes go hot. "Every page," she said. Dominic, sitting at the other end of the table, watched this exchange with an expression that had stopped trying to be neutral about 30 seconds in. He looked down at his coffee cup. His jaw moved slightly. He looked back up and found Hannah looking at him across the table over Sophia's head. And for a moment, they just looked at each other, the way two people look at each other when they have stopped needing to be careful about what their faces show. After the cake, after Lily had gone home with her parents and the table had been cleared, and Sophia had fallen asleep on the couch with the journal pressed against her chest, The adults drifted toward the kitchen in the way adults do after a good day, the kind of drifting that is its own form of contentment. Ray was washing the cake pan. Greta was telling Carmen something funny that had happened at the market. Mrs. Ellison was making tea with the efficiency of someone who finds hurting joy. Hannah stood in the middle of it and let herself feel it fully without bracing. This was a family. It had assembled itself in the most unplanned, sideways, unexpected way a family can assemble itself. But here it was, real and warm, and hers not in the sense of belonging to her, but in the sense that she belonged to it. That there was a place in it specifically shaped like her. She was still standing there when Dominic came to stand beside her. Not close enough to be conspicuous, just close enough that his arm was near hers. "She's going to be all right," he said. He was looking at Sophia on the couch. "She's going to be more than all right," Hannah said. He nodded slowly. "Because of you. Because of all of us," she said. "Because you didn't stop. Because you kept showing up for her even when you were breaking. That matters, Dominic. Kids feel that. They feel whether you stayed or whether you just went through the motions of staying." She glanced at him. "You stayed." He looked at her then, fully. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple, it's just true." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" "You always ask if you can ask," she said. "You never just ask." Something moved across his face that was very close to a smile. It transformed him even briefly, made him look younger and less careful and entirely human. "Hannah, yes. What do you want? Not for Sophia, not for the household, for yourself. What do you want your life to look like?" The question landed somewhere deep. She had not been asked that question in so long that for a moment she didn't know where to find the answer. She thought about it honestly the way she did everything. "I want to stop feeling like a visitor in my own life," she said finally. "I want to wake up in the morning and feel like whatever I'm walking toward is actually mine. Not something I'm borrowing or taking care of for someone else. Mine." She paused. "I want to feel like the good things aren't temporary." He held her eyes for a long moment. "They're not temporary," he said. "Not here." She held his gaze. "Dominic." "I know," he said. "I know the timing is complicated. I know you're Sophia's caretaker, and that creates layers, and I know you're still getting used to the idea that things are allowed to be good. I'm not asking you to figure all of it out tonight." He paused. "I'm just asking you to stop waiting for it to end." She breathed in slowly. "That's a hard habit to break." "I know, I'm familiar with it." He paused. "Break it anyway." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay." Just that. Okay, the same word they had been using between them for months. A word that had quietly accumulated more meaning with each use until it had become a language of its own. 6 months later, the garden was full of light. It was a warm evening in late June, and someone had strung lights between the trees and filled every available surface with flowers, which had been Sophia's idea, and which Sophia had overseen with a level of creative authority that had left Greta both exhausted and deeply impressed. The household was all there, Ray, in a jacket he clearly found uncomfortable, but wore anyway. Carmen and her husband, Mrs. Ellison, in a dress that made her look like the formidable woman she had always been. Marcus standing near the gate with his arms folded and his eyes bright. Sophia was in a yellow dress with her hair done properly for once, which had required 40 minutes in a negotiation that Hannah would later describe as the most complex diplomatic situation she had ever managed. The little girl stood near the center of the garden, holding a small velvet box with both hands, and she held it with the absolute serious concentration of someone who understands that she has been trusted with something very important. Hannah stood across from Dominic in the middle of all these people who had become her people, this family that had assembled itself in the most improbable way from grief and stubbornness and star-shaped pasta, and one small girl who had touched a stranger's cheek in a marble hallway and decided with the complete certainty of a child who knows what she knows that this was the one. Dominic looked at Hannah the way he had looked at her from the beginning, directly without performance, with the particular focus of a man who has decided something and means all of it. He said her name first. Just her name the way he always said it, like setting something down carefully. Then he said, "You came into this house and you didn't try to fix it. You just stayed in it. You let Sophia find her way to you, and you let me find my way to you, and you made this place feel like what it was supposed to be all along." He paused. I spent a long time thinking that what I lost was the last good thing that was going to happen to me. I was wrong. You're what happened instead. His voice was steady, but the steadiness was the kind that cost something. I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that you belong here, that you are wanted here, exactly as you are without a single thing changed. He reached out, and Sophia stepped forward with enormous dignity and placed the box in his hand. He opened it. He looked at Hannah. "Marry me," he said. Hannah heard Sophia hold her breath beside him. She heard Ray cough once quietly into his fist. She heard Mrs. Ellison say nothing at all, which from Mrs. Ellison was the loudest possible response. She looked at the man in front of her. She looked at the little girl with her hands clasped together, eyes enormous hope radiating off her like heat. She thought about the morning she had almost not called the number. She thought about sitting on a bench a block away from the gate, talking herself into believing she had the right to walk through it. She thought about Victor Kane's voice telling her she was a nobody who had nothing, and how she had believed it for so long, and how completely wrong it had turned out to be. She thought about her mother, about the Bible with the names on the inside cover, about the photograph at Navy Pier, two people laughing in the summer, not knowing what was coming, just present in the good thing while it was good. She let herself be present in the good thing. "Yes," she said. And before the word had fully left her mouth, Sophia made a sound that was part scream and part laugh in entirely 4-year-old joy, and threw herself at both of them simultaneously. And Dominic caught her with one arm and pulled Hannah close with the other. And for a moment, the three of them were just holding on, right there in the middle of the lights and the flowers and the people who loved them. Holding on the way people hold on when they have found the thing they didn't know they were looking for and intend not to let it go. The crowd erupted around them. Ray was the loudest, which surprised everyone, including Ray. Mrs. Ellison pressed her handkerchief to the corner of one eye and then straightened her spine and said to no one in particular, "Well, it's about time." And that was the most she was going to give them, and it was exactly enough. Later, much later, after Sophia had fallen asleep between the two of them on the garden blanket with her yellow dress rumpled, and the velvet box clutched in one hand, Dominic and Hannah sat in the quiet that came after everything had been felt and said and celebrated. "You know this is only the beginning," he said. "I know," she said. "It won't always be easy." "I know that too." He looked at her. "You're not scared." She thought about it. "I'm terrified," she said honestly. "But it's a different kind of terrified than before. Before I was scared of losing something. Now I'm scared of how much I have to lose." She paused. "That's a good scared." He reached out and took her hand, simple as that, just took it and held it and didn't say anything else because there was nothing else that needed saying. Around them, the lights held the garden warm, and the city moved in its enormous, indifferent way beyond the fence. And inside these walls, the world was small and specific and entirely enough. Hannah Brooks had arrived at this house with a suitcase and a debt, and the deeply held belief that she was the kind of person life happened to, rather than the kind of person life was built for. She had been wrong about that. She had been wrong about it in the most complete way a person can be wrong, not because the world had suddenly become fair, or because hardship had stopped being real, but because she had stayed. She had stayed through the fear and the doubt and the weight of everything Victor Kane had tried to make her believe she was. She had stayed, and in staying, she had become exactly what she had always been underneath all of it, which was someone worth staying for. The little girl sleeping between them had known it from the first moment. It had just taken everyone else a little longer to catch up.